Second. And now I've got the pleasure of introducing Candace. Candace Cahill is a first mother and an NPE who grew up in central Minnesota. After earning her social work degree, she embarked on a year-long bicycle trip with her partner Tom and then settled in Alaska, where she now lives. She is a writer and a self-taught silversmith and a singer and a songwriter. And as I mentioned, she lives in Alaska, and she works actually as a national park ranger during the summer months. I will be putting Candace's website in the chat. Candace is also the author of a recent book released called Goodbye Again, a memoir by Candace Cahill, and I'll be putting the link to that in the chat as well. So with that, I give you Candace.
All right. Thank you so much, Betsy, for having me, for everybody at the Adoption Network Cleveland. Can you hear me okay? Everything's all right? Good. All right. Like I said, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about the process of writing a memoir, sharing my story, the importance of that. And I'll be talking about the process and all of that, but my story will be mixed in there as well. So I want to begin by making sure everybody knows that if some of the things that I share are triggering or you have a hard time, give yourself a break. If you need to take a break, feel free to do so. Don't feel like you have to stay on camera, although I love seeing all your faces, partly because living in Alaska, I don't get to see very many faces normally. So I love seeing all the faces. But take care of yourself, because I know sometimes these topics can be really tough. We've lived these experiences and everybody has different reactions to them. So take care of yourself first and foremost. So basically you've got the introduction. I live in Alaska. I'm a national park ranger. I'm a social worker, all of those things. Married to my husband, Tom. We've been together for almost 30 years now. We've known each other since we were young kids. And, but we'd never had children of our own. So, Michael was our one and only. And, so my story, for those of you that don't know, Goodbye Again is about losing my son twice. So first through adoption. Oh, Team Tom, Linda, I saw that. First through adoption as an infant back in 1990. And then 23 years later, he died in his sleep, suddenly with no known cause. We did 2 different autopsies and they have no reason for it. So it's almost like an adult version of SIDS. So we don't know what happened, but for me, losing him that second time brought all of the grief back from the initial loss of the relinquishment. So that's really what my book is about. And it is, however, buoyed up by a through line that is a love story. That is the story of me and Tom, because Tom has known me all the way through it all. He's not Michael's father, but we've been, through this together. And I think that's an important thing for people to know, that although there is a lot of sadness in the book, there's a lot of grief. It's about grief and loss. There is love and things and resilience throughout it all. So in terms of writing, so one of the questions that Betsy wanted me to address is like, what led me to make the decision to write this story? So there is an actual inciting incident. That's a very writerly term that instigated me making the decision to write. And it's a fun story that I like to share. So Tom and I were on vacation in the Caribbean when we turned 50. We were celebrating our 50th birthdays. And we were sitting on the beach, nice sunny blue water. We had, Dos Equis beers and sunny and beautiful. And we were talking about the fact that we had just gotten life insurance policies. It's because, 50 years old. So you need to have, the updated life insurance policy because you're closer to death, right? But we were joking because we still had an older policy. So we were doubled up. And Tom kind of jokingly turned to me and said, so what are you going to do if I die? Because that's a lot of money, right? And I didn't even paused for a second. I said, well, I would buy a little cabin on a lake or some kind of body of water, and I would write a book. And his immediate response was, why are you waiting? And I'm like, that's a really good point. If I want to write a book, why am I waiting? So as soon as we got back from vacation, I bought myself a little laptop and I started writing. And so that was kind of the impetus to write. When I said that, when I said I wanted to write a book, there was never any question in my mind about what I would write about. Now, even though I have a very fertile creative memory of things from my childhood, I have, and my life. So I've done a lot of adventure travel. I have a childhood that includes a lot of trauma and very difficult things. I have ideas for science fiction and fantasy books and all of these. There's all this stuff milling around in my head, but there was never any question in my mind when I said that I would write a book, that book, what it would be about. And it would be about my experience with Michael. And when I look back at that now, I think there's many reasons for it. Part of it was I really hadn't processed everything yet, even though at that time he'd been gone for about 6 years. Part of it was I kind of knew it would be a way for me to learn more about him, that the process of writing would get me to do research, to go through my journals, to go to the adoption agency and ask for files and fill out all the forms. And so I was would be an opportunity to get to know him better because I didn't know him, right? But more than that, I wanted to try to find a way to explain to the people that I loved, my family and friends, just the extent of the grief that I experienced, because nobody really, I thought, understood. Prior to reunion, if people asked me if I had children, if I decided to tell them that I had relinquished a child, their response was always, oh, that's so beautiful. What a wonderful gift you've given. And you're so selfless, and, all these beautiful adoption tropes, essentially. But I didn't feel that way. Now, I had certainly bought into the adoption is beautiful trope when I relinquished, but I still never felt it in my heart. So I rarely shared that I relinquished. When I did, that was a response I got, and it made me feel like crap. But when he died, and people would ask, and I would say that I had a son who passed away, their immediate reaction was one of sympathy and empathy. And I'm so sorry for your loss. And part of me thought that, okay, perhaps I can use my story as a way to break down some of those barriers, as a way to help people see that relinquishment is loss and trauma, just like the death of a child is loss and trauma. And perhaps I could do it in such a way that they would be able to stay open to talking more in depth about the complexities around relinquishment and adoption. So these were all kind of they ended up playing into the desire to write and to share my story. When I first initially started writing, though, I didn't plan on publishing. And it wasn't until I was about halfway through the first draft that I was like, you know what? I should put this out there. I should give this a chance to help educate and teach people about the realities. In terms of like writing the story, certainly my story is an individual story, but there are so many things that are similar to other people's stories. And I'm finding that out the more people that read it and the more people that contact me. And they say, I see myself in your story. And it's not just first parents that see themselves in my story. It's lots of other people as well. Now, in terms of the lessons I learned from writing are still coming in. So I'm still finding things. But some of the most important things that I've learned is that putting my story down on paper gave me a chance to, first of all, acknowledge that it was there to begin with. I spent a lot of time dissociating from my feelings, from trying to block out what had happened to me, or pretending that there wasn't anything there. So putting it down on paper gave me the chance to acknowledge it. The other thing that it did, it let me step back from it. So probably the most important thing that came out of writing my story is it catapulted me out of the fog. Because when I wrote down the things that happened to me at the adoption agency and the things that happened to me from his birth father's family, the things they said to me and the things they did to me, when I wrote those down on paper and stepped back and took myself out of the story, I could see all of the manipulation and all of the coercion and the things that were used to convince me that I wasn't good enough, that I was less than, that I was broken, and therefore unqualified to be his parent. But I would have never been able to really see that unless I had written it down. I don't think I would have come out of the fog for a long, long time had I not written my story. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. The whole adoption is beautiful trope. I bought into that when I was at the agency. So first of all, I got tricked into go to the agency, and then I kind of fell into it. So, but you got to, I guess, have to read the book to find all that out. But they had all of these very coercive things that led me to believe that I wasn't good enough. And then they brought in all these other people that were perfect, these perfect couples and these perfect families that had money and a big house and all the things that I never had and never thought I would have. And they never told me that I would be able to learn to be a good parent or could acquire the things to be able to be a good parent. I just didn't think it was possible. And I believed it all. And when they told me that, he would be a blank slate, that getting him to his new family as quick as possible would allow him to bond and he would be totally fine. I believed all of that. Actually, I think the vast majority of people working in the field at the time believed the same thing. So, writing the story allowed me to be able to see all those things. It also let me step back, look at what happened to me as a young woman, and forgive her. Not all the time. Sometimes I'm still pretty mean to her, but I could extend some sympathy to that young woman that I was. It was still my choice, and I still take complete responsibility for that choice, but I can see that how I was manipulated and tricked into it. The other thing that I really came away from and understood much more thoroughly after writing this is the need and priority we need to make to center adopted people in all of the conversations, the discussions, and the things that we're doing as we move forward to try to create a better world. Because if it includes adoption, which I have a hard time seeing that we can make a world without it completely, but if it's going to be there, we've got to find better ways. And the best way to do that is to center the adoptee voice. And I think that having written the book really helped me to solidify, to see that. That was really important. It gave me so much clarity in so many parts of my life. Now, in terms of encouraging everybody to write their story, whether they're part of the adoption constellation, I don't care what your story is, the being able to step back is, I think, the biggest part of that. If you can put your story on paper, step back and look at it from a different perspective, will just allow for, I think, greater, particularly if it's traumatic, greater healing, for lack of a better term. It's creative. I think there's so much power in being able to find creative outlets for the things that we do. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything be exactly shiny and pretty. Just being able to put it out there is fulfilling, I think, to a very great extent. Being able to try to create something beautiful from pain is also, I think, valuable in and of itself. Nobody has a story that's exactly like yours. And nobody else can tell the story that you have the way you can. You know, I've talked to several people actually just recently about hiring a ghostwriter to write their stories. And there's nothing wrong with that, but a ghostwriter is not going to write it the way you do. They're not going to be able to pull the same words out, use the same inflections. All of those things come through on the page. I think for those of you that have read my memoir already, there's a clear style, there's a clear voice to it that I don't think anybody else would be able to have done. So you being able to do that will, I think, gives people an opportunity to just become even more of who they are in a way. We're so used to talking. We're used to walking around, but a lot of us aren't used to writing, and writing brings out a whole different way of saying things that you can't do really with just your voice. That's at least how I feel about it. For those of you that are thinking about writing or already writing, there's a few things that I want to kind of tell you. First of all, if you decide to write a memoir, there's going to be a gazillion drafts. Okay, so don't go into it thinking you're going to write it once. It's going to be all done. Nope, that doesn't happen. Just plan that there's going to be a lot of drafts. The first draft is, obviously the most important, because if you don't put it on the page, you have nothing to work with. So you need to give yourself permission to just write as whatever comes to your mind. And I really encourage you not to go back and read what you've written until you've written that full first draft, because it's easy to get drawn back into your own past and get kind of stuck back there. At least it was for me. So the thing that I did wrong, I think, when I look at it now, is when I started writing, I wrote about, I don't know, maybe the equivalent to about 10 chapters. And then I went back and was like, oh, I should change that, the whole way that I started it, right? Like I started thinking about structure and what should come next. And I totally got distracted by that. And I started, instead of finishing the story, I just kept going back to the beginning over and over again and what the beginning should look like. And I think it added probably another 4 to 5 months of time where I just got stuck in that one spot. And I could have been done with the first draft much earlier had that not happened. So basically, I encourage you, write the first draft and then go back and take a look at it. One of the things that I found difficult was looking at the whole story, right? This big, huge whole story. When I realized what I needed to do was break it down into smaller bites, is when I really made a lot more progress. And what I mean by that is writing out individual memories and just sticking with that small little piece and write that memory. And again, don't worry about the words you're using or the sentence structure, anything, those things. Write down the memory. What were your feelings? Do you remember anything that you smelled or tasted that reminds you of it? Is there a metallic essence to it, or is there a sweet essence? I mean, those kinds of things. And just write all that down, jot it down in the memory itself, because those individual little pieces and memories are what you can then build on to create the full flow of the structure to go through. But without those individual memories, you don't have the big story. So that really helped me when I did that, is breaking it down into smaller pieces. What I also ended up finding was that I would write, well, let me say this, reunion. So I struggled so much in reunion. And my struggle was really about when he found me and we reconnected, I wanted to move away from Alaska, go down to Minnesota, buy the house right next door to where Michael lived, grab him, and never let him go again. That's what I wanted to do. And everybody said, oh, no, don't do that. And it's like, that's what I wanted to do, right? And so all the time, all I wanted, I just wanted to grab him again and never let him go. And that was not the thing to do. Everybody told me not to do that. And I listened. And I'm really, really grateful that I listened. Because what I finally realized is, again, and I didn't realize this until well after the fact, is that he didn't have a choice in the adoption, right? He didn't have no choice in anything. So he needed to have control when we got back together. And it was really important for that to happen, but I struggled mightily with that. And so, trying to describe to people what I was experiencing with that angst in reunion, I had like 25 individual scenes that show my angst, right? I mean, because over and over and over again, he would send a text and I'd be like, woo, and I'd be so excited and I'd write him right back and I'd wait. And I'd wait and I'd wait and I'd wait a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, 6 months. I mean, just, and there was nothing I could do, right? And it was killing me. I swear to you, it was killing me. So in writing my story, every single one of those experiences I wrote about. I cut, I think there were like 22 of those scenes. Yeah, there's 3 in the book. There's 3. But writing all 22 of those scenes was important for me to distill down and find the best way to write it so that the people who read it can really understand what I was going through. And when I look back at the finished product of the manuscript, I believe I did that. I believe I was capable of taking those 22 scenes, turning them into 3, and making it so that people, even if they had no experience with adoption or relinquishment, could understand what I was experiencing in reunion. So those are little tips. one of my big tips. Get a writing buddy. Have somebody that you can share your work with. Now, this is vitally important once you get past that first draft. And better than a single person is a group of people, but at least one person. You need at least one other set of eyes on the words that you've written to help give you feedback, to give you an outside perspective on what they're reading. What I used was an online writing community, and it ended up being a specifically memoirist group. There were 18 of us, and we would split into groups of 6 for 6-week cycles. And each week we would send a chapter to the other 5 people in our group, and then I would receive 5 chapters. I would get the opportunity to critique their work, give them feedback, everything from grammar to, anything and everything. And then I would receive 5 critiques in return. Now, my group was made up of people writing memoirs about horse training, deafness, Mormonism, child loss, murder. I mean, all kinds of things. And they were writers or not. There were some professors, was a lawyer, a couple of, stay-at-home moms, homemakers, and, so just all kinds. All of those perspectives gave me a richness that absolutely invaluable. So getting yourself a writing group, or at least one person to help you work through your chapters, super important. Some things you should know: you will hate your work sometimes, and other times you will love it. Sometimes you will cry because it's beautiful. Sometimes you'll cry because it sucks. All of that is going to be a part of the journey if you decide to write your story. You will question your abilities. You will question your sanity. You will wonder what the hell you ever thought you were getting into. But if you choose to do this and get to the end, it will be one of the most profoundly satisfying experiences of your life, I believe. You will also question your right to be able to do it. And I'm here to tell you right now that it's your story. You have a right to share it and tell it. And the world needs to hear your story. Everybody does. I want to share one of the most profound responses I've gotten so far from my sharing my memoir. So first of all, actually, let me preface that. Every time I've done an event so far with my book, in-person event. So I've done some virtual ones. It's different virtually, but any of the in-person, every single one, when I get done, I would say at least 70% of the people that are there. Now, I haven't had hundreds of people. We're talking like, 30 people. I think the biggest group I had was maybe 40, but 70% of the people come up to me afterward and they share their adoption story. Because pretty much everybody has an adoption story of some kind or another. And by writing my story, I feel just by writing it and sharing it, I've given them permission to share theirs. And I think that there's a lot of value in that, particularly when we're talking about adoption and relinquishment, because it still tends to be such a hidden, it's such a difficult topic for people to talk about. So that's been really profound. But the most profound experience I've had so far, which has made sharing it in and of itself, like if nobody else ever says another word about my book, I'm totally fine. I had a woman come up to me who was crying in tears. She had read it before the event. And she came up to me afterwards. Actually, no, I take it back. She came up to me beforehand. And she was crying and she had a difficult time getting control. And when she did, she said, my sister adopted 2 children. And when their children came home from the hospital or wherever, they foster home, whatever it is, everybody, we were all so excited. And we were thrilled and it was amazing. And like the town came out and it was just this absolutely grand and wonderful experience. And she started crying again. She goes, I never once thought about you. I never once thought about the mom. Never once. And she said she was sorry. And it was just to me, it hit a mark I didn't know I had, and continues to be one of the most profound experiences. And when I look at it, like I said, I feel like if nothing else ever comes from sharing my story, that in and of itself was one of the most valuable things I've ever experienced. So with that, I'm going to open it up to you guys. Is that all right, Betsy?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Candace. So if people have questions for Candace or any comments, feel free to put them in chat. We don't have any yet, so I have a couple. One is, Candace, I would think that writing a memoir, obviously it's full of self-disclosure and there's a lot of choice points, or maybe you just throw it to the wind and see what happens. Were there things that you were either surprised that you shared, or on the flip side, things that you thought maybe you should share and then opted not to? How much did you kind of self-edit your thoughts or experiences?
So I tried to, what I was surprised about was, it's weird. I was awful. I was an awful teenager. I was an awful young woman, right? And or there were parts of me that were awful. And like one of the most vivid things that I shared in the book that I found really, really difficult was the experience with my niece when I had basically physically abused her. And when I wrote that scene, I was floored that I put it down. But as soon as I wrote it, I was like, oh my God, it has to be in there, because part of writing this kind of a story is being as completely honest with the reader as you can. It's one thing to be honest with myself, but it's a totally different thing to be honest with the reader. And if I had taken that out, which I thought about doing, it would have, I think, taken away from the feeling of truthfulness that was in there. In terms of self-editing, I really tried not to. And because I knew that if I wasn't as honest as I could be, people just wouldn't believe me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that made your book a very enjoyable and worthwhile read. So it felt like you were being very authentic and very honest. Yeah.
I've had a couple people say that that they felt almost when they finished reading it, they felt almost like they had been sitting in a room behind a screen listening in on a private conversation, and that they almost like they were voyeurs in my life. And I took that as a compliment, because I think that I wanted people to be in my shoes. And the only way to do that was to really put it out there. When Tom first of all, Tom didn't read the book. He didn't help me. He didn't nothing until I sent the manuscript to my publisher. Then he read it. Then he read it, and he was like, "Holy shit, you put a lot of stuff in there." But he was like, "But it's all true, it's all true." And but yeah, that was pretty interesting when he first read it, because I was like, oh shit, what is he gonna say? Yeah. I hope does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. So we do have a question from somebody in the group who I happen to know is also a writer. And she's asking, when you decided to publish, did you self-publish? Did you go to an agent or a publisher? And what influenced your decision around that?
Okay, so when I decided, when the manuscript was complete, or what I thought was complete. Okay, so again, about the whole drafts thing. When I thought it was complete, I started sending query letters to agents, because I thought, well, I'll get an agent, and try to get published. And I think I sent out about 30 query letters to agents. I got a lot of rejections. I got ignored. I got requests for pages from like three different agents, and one request for the full manuscript. And I got good feedback, but nobody was really interested in picking it up. I'm a nobody. I don't have a platform. All of those things. But then, so that was actually early 2020. The pandemic was just getting over, quote unquote, over. And that's when I was given the opportunity to get a job at the national park. So I took that job in the spring. So I was writing query letters in February and March, got the job in April, or actually it wasn't until June, but got the job. And then, so I just quit. I quit looking for agents. I figured, well, and at the end of the summer, when I'm done with work, I'm going to pick it back up again, and I'll start back in. When I got done with the season, though, over the summer, I had been reading a lot of other people's experiences with agents and publishers, etc. And I reevaluated it. And I made the decision to not pursue an agent because I felt that an agent, in my mind, now again, I hadn't done tons of research, but in my mind, I figured that an agent was going to help me find a really good publisher and also help me with marketing and publicity. But my research had indicated that that was no longer the case. Agents didn't really do that anymore, and neither did publishers. They don't really do much of the marketing or public publicity for you anymore. A lot of times they're relying on the authors to do that. And I'm like, well, if I have to do all that myself, why am I paying an agent when I can just send query letters to publishers? Now, you can't send a query letter to big publishers, but I wasn't going to get a big publisher anyway. I didn't have any delusions about that. So I'm like, well, I'll just look for small publishers. And I started putting together a list of, very, very small micro publishers and sent out a couple of letters. And the first person that responded wanted to pick me up. She asked for my manuscript. She read it in like 3 days and sent me an offer to publish right then. I quit. I was like, okay, that's good enough for me. And, looking back on it, I could have probably found a little bigger publisher, perhaps. But I'm super happy with the way that I did it. It's a tiny press called Legacy Book Press. She publishes about 6 books a year is all. It's really just her, and she's got a couple people that she hires to help her. And it's been great. And with a small press, I get a higher percentage of royalties, but she takes care of, she did all the editing, professional editing, she worked with me to get the book cover, but I still also had a lot of control, which was really nice. Self-publishing, I would have gone that direction. I think I had told myself I'd give myself about 6 months to try to find a publisher. And if I didn't, then I would move towards self-publishing. But I'm glad that it worked out this way. Yeah.
Thanks. We have a couple written questions and then one person with their hand up. So why don't we go through a couple written questions, and then Sharon, I see you and I'll get to you in a minute. Can you talk about any legal or relationship problems that you faced from telling your story?
So there are none. No, it's kidding. So first of all, the only names I changed in the book were my son, Michael, his birth father. I changed his name, his family's name, because we have not seen each other since that day we picked the parents together. I don't even know where he is. I don't even think he knows that Michael has died. I have no idea. But I changed their names. I changed, there was one friend who was like, I just don't really want my name out there. My siblings all wanted their names changed. Don't know why, but David's family, Michael's family, David, his brother, his whole extended family, his girlfriend, Hannah, everybody else wanted their names, their real names. And they signed over basically waivers that would allow me to use their real names. So I had them do that. It was just a super simple form. But anybody whose name that was real that I used in the book, I asked for them to sign a waiver. And that's what I did. In terms of relationship issues, my siblings are struggling so hard with this entire story. And I think from talking to them, which is minimal because they don't know how to talk, I'm the only one in the family who's worked through a lot of my issues, still working through my issues, but they don't know how. And reading my story, the first thing that happens is they feel guilty. They're like, we didn't know. We didn't even give you the time of day. And I'm like, well, you didn't know to know. I mean, I wasn't asking for help or anything. But their automatic response is to feel guilty and to shut down, which is a trauma response. We all grew up in the same traumatic family, so we all have the same things. I've just started to learn how to not do that. But they continue to struggle. And one of my sisters hasn't even been able to get through the whole book yet, and it's been out for a little while. But I'm here. I'm hoping that they'll continue to talk to me. But other than that, I have pretty much lots of support from everybody.
Thanks. Another kind of technical question about publishing, again, from somebody who's obviously a writer, and she's got 30,000 words and plans to end at around 80,000. She's wondering if what's the perfect length to get published? Is shorter better?
So for memoir, the stats that they say is between 60 and 80,000 words that's the sweet spot, 60, 80,000. Mine was.
Maybe we've lost Candace.
Or, a bigger publisher.
Okay,
those are pretty hard rules.
You faded out just for a second. Can you repeat your answer? That's okay. It's unavoidable. Just the short version of the answer. 60
to 80,000.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Sharon, you're up.
Candace, I just resonated with so much that you have told naturally, and being a birth mom too. But what really got to me was at your book signing, when the adoptive mother took it so hard. I had the same incident when I saw the movie Lifemark, and I went with 8 people other from my triad meeting. We all went together, and right in the middle of the movie, this woman behind me, 2 or 3 rows behind me, just started bawling out loud, just hysterically. And I thought myself, that must be a birth mom. She's having such a hard time. And I thought, if she's still here when the movie's over, I'm going to talk to her. And when the movie was over, there was one couple sitting about where she was. And I went back and talked to her and asked if she was the one that was having such a difficult time. And she said, yes, we are adoptive parents, and we love our 2 little adoptive kids. But I never did think about how hard it was for a birth mom. It just never did occur to them, that a birth mom has to go through everything that she saw in the movie. So when you told me that this woman did that at the book signing, I thought that the same thing happened to me too. And it's just pretty amazing when you realize that you can help so many people with your story. And I'm just so proud of you for getting yours out there.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate that. I have had quite a few adopted people come up and talk to me about, writing my story and giving them a window into one woman's experience, relinquishing their child. And there are lots of individual experiences with relinquishment, but I think there are a lot of through lines that are pretty similar. But there are so few out there, and there are so few people that are willing to talk about it. And I believe a big part of the inability to talk about it is, I guess for me, most of it was from shame and feeling ashamed. In addition to the grief, the ambiguous grief and the disenfranchised grief. But I think for a lot of people, birth parents, birth moms in particular, trying to get through that and talk about it, it's just so painful. And just like with any other kind of trauma, you can't deal with it by going around it. You got to go through it. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They'll do everything they can to avoid it rather than go through it.
Any other questions from folks attending? We have time for probably 1 or 2 more questions.
I'll peek at my notes to make sure I remembered everything there.
Candace, I would love to hear too if there's any other feedback that you've gotten, or I know that you've done some publicity and written some blogs and been out there. Are there any other people that have come up to you or messages that you've gotten that stand out?
So I have, for the most part, I've gotten really positive responses from people, particularly. So like I've put in essays in some bigger publications like Huffington Post, Newsweek, Today.com, those where they're reaching some pretty big diverse audiences. The vast majority of people that connect with me are either adoptive parents or first parents, and just sharing that they appreciate seeing something that's connected to them out there. I have had my share of people, not a ton, but a few that have really been gotten down on me in the sense of, how dare I use my dead son to write a book? How dare I use him in this way? Like I am going to make my fortune off of his tragedy, and that has been really hard. That has been because I can see their point. I totally understand. What I always come back to with that is, I know what's in my heart. I know that my writing the story doesn't have anything to do with, using him to my advantage. I do believe that he would appreciate the fact that I'm sharing my story so other people can hopefully find some help and healing and find their way to being okay with who they are, what they've done in their past, recognizing that your past doesn't dictate your future or even your now. It has an impact on who you become, but you don't have to let it dictate who you are now. And but yeah, the trolls, I guess. I've had my share of trolls, and that can be really hard, particularly every time, but I knew, and Tom and I talked about that when the decision was made that I was going to seek publication and publish this book. We both knew that I was going to be putting a target out there, that I could potentially, be the target of some not so nice stuff. But when I made the decision to write and to do so honestly and be honest in my story depiction, I also said, I'm going to be open to any of the criticism that comes as a result too, and hopefully use it as a tool to learn myself, which I do feel like I have. I've learned a lot since the first piece I published came out. I have learned a lot more.
My take on reading your book was it was very authentic and it was your story. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I guess I hadn't really thought about it until you said that. But I think you probably would have written your story no matter what the end point was. If Michael had not passed away, I don't think it was about him passing away so much. That that was a poignant part of the story, but it's not. I didn't take that as like what the point of the book was about, really.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think that I probably would have written the book, but it probably wouldn't have happened for another 20 or 30 years.
Well, because your story would have been unfolding in a different way.
Yeah. Loretta, you have a question?
Oh, yes. Well, it's not a question. I just want to thank you for sharing tonight and telling us a little bit about your story. I definitely want to get the book, and I would love to read it, but I just want to thank you, for sharing with us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Loretta. Thanks.
Well, for everybody that signed in, we will be sending an email after this evening, and it will have the link to Candace's website and to the book if you didn't get that this evening in the chat. So I am also going to put in the chat a link to our calendar. We have support and discussion meetings that are attended by adoptees, birth parents, first parents, adoptive parents, and others. Everybody is welcome. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can check out the things that are coming up there. And I also am putting in a link for a very short program evaluation. Oh, I'm sorry, this only went to one person. I'll try that one more time. So we do ask people to fill out just a very short survey about your experience this evening. It's only a couple questions, so if you don't mind doing that, that would be great. And I will put the calendar in because I got it wrong the first time. So.
And I just put in the chat 4 different online writing communities that you could utilize if you were interested in writing short or long pieces, but they're communities that allow you to get critiques and feedback on the work that you're doing. Because again, feedback is such an important part of this entire process. And then one other little tiny thing, since we have the couple minutes, if you don't mind, Betsy.
Sure.
If you're writing and you want to publish, whether short or long, it might sound really dumb, but most writing programs on your computers anyway have a read back feature. Okay, so it's like, it's a computer voice, but use it. Because when we read back our own writing, so often, let's say we wrote 4, we thought we wrote 4, but it turns into 2, but we don't see it because we wrote it ourselves, so our mind just goes over it. But if the computer reads it back to you, you're going to catch these little itty bitty tiny mistakes that really make a difference in the overall presentation, particularly if you're trying to submit to some of publications for shorter pieces. Yeah, use that read back feature. It's very important and very helpful. Yeah, sorry, that was one little thing I forgot to put out there.
That's a very helpful tidbit. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought to do that. I know sometimes when I write something, not like a memoir, but like an important email, and I sit on it for a day and then read it again the next day, it's not what I thought I wrote sometimes. So definitely helpful to review your work, and I can see hearing it out loud could be great.
Yeah, it's super helpful. But sitting on it for a day, also very important, or a week or however long. That was the other thing with writing. When I sent out to agents, and then I took that break while I was working for the summer in the national park, that break away from my manuscript, when I went back and looked at, I had been through 10 times, right? And rewritten all that stuff. But I went through after that and I found a bunch more things that I could fix and make better. So giving yourself some space with it is very valuable as well. Yeah.
So maybe you said this when you were speaking and I missed it, but how long was the total time from when you started to when it was out in the world?
Okay, so I started writing in the spring of 2019, and it came out in this last year. So November of 2022.
So that's 2.5 years.
2.5 years, and that's pretty fast.
That sounds fast.
Yeah. But I had COVID. I had COVID. COVID happened, and I didn't have a job. I lost my job, and Tom was like, "I guess you need to just dedicate yourself to writing the book." So that's what I did, and I spent that pretty much almost that whole year writing, rewriting, revising, all of those things. So I used it to my advantage.
And we're all lucky that you did. So thank you for bringing that story out into the world. So I'm going to close us out and say good night. Adoption Network Cleveland is a membership organization, as many of you know, and we'd welcome your membership to help keep you informed and support our programming. So you can see that on our website. We also have lots of programmatic activities, the continued Monday evening speaker series, lots of different support meetings, educational sessions, etc. And you can check all that out on our website, adoptionnetwork.org. Thank you so much, Candace. This was really valuable information.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and listening to me jabber on about my experience and for reading my book.
You're getting lots of love in the comments too. So
yeah. Oh yeah, and I'll tell Team Tom. for those of you on Team Tom.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.